So, in very, very broad terms, you get the figure or the archetype of the Buddha, which represents enlightenment, and then you get the path, which is usually, the path is usually a translation of the term Dharma, which is also, it's used, the word Dharma is used in lots of different ways, teaching, as well as practice generally. And I think a very useful way of connecting path and enlightenment is to have the attitude that you already have the seeds of enlightenment within you. You already have the seeds of virtue and positive qualities, to speak very generally, which can be enhanced through awareness, through meditation, and can bloom and blossom over time. And maybe all those qualities, positive virtues and qualities, can merge, and over time there is much more of a sense of a unified stream of consciousness, you could say. And that unified stream of consciousness is your aspiration to stay with those positive qualities and to engage with them, to feed them, and to watch out for the particular negative attitudes and mental states which disrupt your positive virtues. I know that virtue sounds a bit like something out of a Victorian novel, or you get statues of the four virtues around, or six, is it six? Anyway, there's quite a few of them. So it's quite an old-fashioned kind of phraseology of virtues. So we have to, in a way, interpret it and translate it to our own awareness of our positive qualities, which help us grow and to develop and give us clarity about how we are and what's happening around us, and more generally also our care and kindness for those around us. So that's a very, very general way of talking about virtues, positive qualities. There are lots. Honesty, for example, is a virtue. Honesty about how you are. I mean, we were talking. Someone came up. I won't say who came up with the word, and they didn't like it, but it was true. So then you have to go, well, it's true. Actually, I don't like that word for a description of how I am, but it's true. And that is a form of self-honesty, actually taking it on. Doesn't fit the image of oneself that one perhaps has or would like, but that's the truth. So basing this attitude of you have the seeds of enlightenment within you, actually, and acknowledging them actually kind of helps you rejoice in your own positive qualities. And I think this actually in itself can be quite challenging for a lot of people, to say, well, actually, I am quite a kind person, but there's always a little but can come up. And sometimes you just have to sit on your butt, you have to just terrible expression. You have to put it aside and just acknowledge that truth for what the positive quality for what it is, and engage with it, and then it actually can grow. Rather than if you're saying yes, but I'm also like that, or I wasn't like that yesterday, which might be true, but it's you still have that quality. You still you still have that ability to be generous, for example, and empathetic and considerate of others. So this process of acknowledging your positive qualities it can be quite challenging, just to over time acknowledge that you have lots of different qualities. Some of them are double-edged. You can be honest, but you might be a bit sharp with people, a bit harsh even in the way that you're honest. Well, I'm just being honest. No, you were being cruel. Sometimes you have to actually see that, our positive qualities can be double-edged. Kindness can be a bit schmaltzy and a bit gooey. Yeah, I know that's the base. So one has to be able to get a recognition of what the quality actually is like. Is the honesty hard, and a bit unsympathetic? Or does the honesty have kindness and empathy in it and connected with it, for example? So this process of, in a way, separating out qualities. So I'll give you an example, from a simple example. When I was much younger, thought, oh, I'm spontaneous, but actually I was just reckless. And then I had to learn the difference between being reckless. I did some, when I was younger, traveling, swimming with sharks and things like that. I was pretty reckless. I didn't realize it was their feeding time. Oh God, when I think about it, I go into a sweat. I was in the Red Sea and I thought there was a ship, and I swam out to it and I saw the sharks and I carried on going. And the guy, when I got there, the guy on the ship said, oh, I just fed the sharks. So they're hungry, So I think you should just stay here a while till they're not hungry anymore. For example, so over time, I got to recognize what being spontaneous felt like in contrast to being reckless, where something would just occur to me, and there would be a moment of, this actually is a good thing, and then do it. So it wasn't reckless in the sense of no perception of the value of that action. There would be some clarity about that. This actually would be fine. It's not going to kill me. Or this might be helpful. So that was just an example that you get to separate out a sense of distinction of your qualities over time. And part of that process is endorsing your positive qualities. Sometimes as I often say this, and it's so often true, it's easier to see this in others. And it can be very frustrating. Like I have a very dear friend who we started being friends when we were 15, and we used to do art classes and go to studios and draw together, and he was always fantastic. And then he got into working, and he didn't draw or paint or do anything, and it really upset me. And then he retired, and COVID struck, and then he was just at home, so he started painting, and he's amazing. He could just pick it up. He hadn't done a portrait in 40 years. He could do a portrait, and it's like I'm thinking all that waste of time, But it's and now he's thinking, oh yeah, I could have done it earlier. So actually endorsing your positive qualities is really important, and investing in them even, and letting them grow and develop. And in that way, your positive qualities grow. There's a very simple dynamic here, which is that if you stay with a positive quality, it grows. It's very, very simple. That's what happens. If you stay with your kindness, it grows. If you stay with your generosity and your empathy and your considerateness and your honesty, it all grows and develops. And as it grows, it sort of fills you, fills your whole mind. And it's not the only way of looking at transformation, but those positive qualities have a dissolving effect on their negative counterparts. So the kindness dissolves unkindness and cruelty, for example. So it's not the only way of looking at that, but it is true. That the more that you endorse your positive qualities, the more that their unhelpful and negative counterparts don't have space, actually, and they get converted and transformed over time. So there is a way of just seeing this. Very simple in a way. You just get determined to be honest, to acknowledge, to work with what's here, to endorse the positive qualities, and be consistent in your awareness. I mean, it's very interesting to me that sometimes a word will pop up like consistent. It has been popping up a lot in relationship to people I know. They just need to be more consistent. And I'm not saying that because I'm not, I am pretty consistent actually. But I can see it when others are not. And we talk about it and they go, yeah, I just need to be more consistent. I need to practice meditation more consistently. I need to be more consistent in my decision to be mindful and keep a continuity. So there's this sort of sense of constancy or consistency in keeping focused on developing and staying in touch with positive qualities. And one of the things that does is that it feeds your aspiration view. I think aspiration is quite an interesting word. It's sort of aspiring to something, but it's also a movement. It's a momentum at the same time. So your momentum to engage, to notice, to feed and endorse and feed your positive qualities gets momentum. And I think very often it seems like in the beginning you're having to do all the work. You're having to notice the things that are not helpful and helpful. And you're having to, consciously, excuse me, consciously, still got that frog, consciously feed them. And then at a certain point in time, over time, they become more memory resident, they become more innate, and you find yourself, you're not having to be so vigilant all the time about, am I being aware, not being aware, and so on. It just gets a life of its own, and a momentum of its own, a sort of flow, you could say. And you're just in it. There is an element of agency and initiative, but basically your growth and development it has a life of its own. And this is, I think, when you can really enjoy your Dharma practice. Because you don't say, here we go again, I have to watch out for that again, I have to do that. You're just in it and it's happening. A sort of easy effort, you could say, of just keeping steering yourself. And in this way, you notice that shifts happen in your levels of consciousness, and shifts happen in your positive qualities. They go deeper or richer or more far-going. They're less self-interested, perhaps. And that also it's important to acknowledge that, not get big-headed about it, I'm much more better than I used to be, but just there's some honest acknowledgement. So I wanted to have a bit of a shift for a few minutes to a completely different topic, which is the imagination and thinking. So when I first got involved in Buddhism and practicing the Dharma, I was much more interested in silence, actually, and imagery. So I went to Japan and I went to a Zen temple for nearly a year, and they didn't talk about Buddhism at all. And actually, in a certain way, that kind of suited me, suited my temperament. It doesn't suit everybody, I don't think. But it gave me the opportunity to find my way into what meditation was. And then later on, when I came back to the West and I got involved in this movement, Triratna, then I realized that actually conceptual understanding of the principles actually was useful. And thinking actually was useful, or potentially useful. So I then started to learn about the Buddha's teaching, whereas before it was much more an intuitive thing on my part. So I think I'm not running myself down. I didn't have two thoughts to rub together when I was in my early 20s, late teens. I didn't even think thinking was a very good thing. But then I realized it was important, and I took it on for clarity and direction, and being able to give myself clear direction. But in relationship to that is the whole faculty of the imagination. And I think that I got off to a bad start, really, with imagination, because I was just into fantasy from a very young age, staring out the school window, imagining something, fantasizing. which is like it takes you away from what's happening, rather than helps you engage with what is happening. Whereas there are ways, they told me they had to go, so it's fine. You can use the image making faculty to help you get a real sense of how you are, to engage directly. And some people are just not used to using the imagination in this way. So they need to get used to it by asking themselves a rhetorical question every now and then. You know, what would be a facial expression that expresses how I am now? For example, it's a rhetorical question. You know, it's an internal. You might get all kinds of facial expressions come up that you might not like or like in that moment, but you check, does it fit? And you go, yeah, I don't like it, but it fits. So that's one level. You get used to using your imaginal faculty through rhetorical questions. But another facet, which is very useful in growth and development generally, is archetypes. So when I was very young, well, not very young, but young, I had an affinity with the Greek figure of Hermes, the winged messenger, you know, has the caduceus, which is also a symbol of doctors and medicine, and it can fly. And then my teacher, Sangrakshita, gave me the name Vajradaka, which is like the Buddhist equivalent of Hermes. It's almost like, in a way, they're the same thing almost. I found that very interesting because Vajradaka means skywalker or sky dancer, can fly through the sky of the mind, communication, very much like the qualities of Hermes, actually. I mean, just to say a little bit more about that, the Romans called Hermes Mercury and being mercurial. And I think that also really fitted my temperament, especially in the early years. So the reason I'm telling that is not just to tell you all about me, but just to give you an example that it can be very useful to become familiar with archetypes and myths from our culture, but other cultures, and just ask, what speaks to me? Some do, and some don't, you know. I mean, an example of that is I've got friends who relate to the Hindu god Ganesha, which is an elephant god. I've never been able to relate to that. I can't relate to it at all, but they do. So I think that just to show that it's just useful to ask yourself the question, what can I relate to? What speaks to me in terms of an archetype that expresses something that either I'm like or I'm becoming, for example. So that then can grow into an awareness of the whole pantheon, to call it that, of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the Buddhist tradition that express different qualities. And you can have affinities at different times with different Buddhas or Bodhisattvas that express something that is relevant to you. Like a friend of mine recently said, oh, I took up the practice of a particular Tibetan figure, Padmasambhava, because for me he represented converting my demons. But now I don't relate to that figure anymore because he'd mostly converted his demons. So, he'd moved on. I mean, he needed to find the next archetype. So, in a way, all I'm suggesting is that you just explore this. You explore archetypes that show you or communicate qualities which you have or need at a deeper level than just your ideas about yourself.